but standing at 6 feet, the physics fanatic, Mr. Kofa. And Mr. Coleman is going to be going against our school's economic expert, standing at 6'3" and noticeably larger than Mr. Coleman, is Mr. Deal.
Good.
With all our speakers here, I'd like to hand the mic over to Alina Armar.
Video games should be considered a sport, with our pro speaker, Mr. Coltman, and our con speaker, Mr. Deal. You will have 6 minutes to speak. Starting with pro.
All right. I would like to start off my speech first by thanking Kofa High School and Kofa's JSA program for the hospitality regarding this event. It is an honor to be able to debate my opponent, Mr. Deal, and be able to make my case in front of such an audience. As then when I wrote this, I figured there would be more audience, but it worked. Olympic gold medalist and two-time World Cup champion Julie Foudy once said, "Sports build good habits, confidence, and discipline. They make players into community leaders and teach them how to strive for a goal, handle mistakes, and cherish growth opportunities. Regardless of what competition is, sports create camaraderie, teamwork, and perseverance. Players set goals for themselves and strive to meet them while in competition. For many people, defining what makes a sport is kind of like defining the color purple. You just simply know it when you see it. But the roar of the crowd, players dedicated to the task, and the thrill of victory and the sorrow of defeat, these are the experiences that we associate with sports. In a more formal setting, sports is defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as having 3 fundamental components. You must have some level of physical exertion, involve either individuals or teams competing in a task, and it must be done for the entertainment of an audience. And I will argue that by this definition, esports and video games are clearly considered a sport. Daniel Kane at the United States Sports Academy wrote in his doctoral paper, Recognizing Esports as a Sport, that the primary barrier to the recognition of esports lies with the perception that there is no physical activity involved. He draws from research that states that e-athletes experience an increase in blood pressure, basal metabolic rate, and heart rate while competing, all of which point to physical activity being done. Another way of perceiving physical activity is that the way that they compete. According to Tech Journal and Gadget, top-end esports competitors top out at about 600 actions per minute. That is defined as either presses of a button or clicks of a mouse that are done intentionally. Most of us are lucky if we can do 10 random actions in a second. These people are doing 10 purposeful and meaningful actions per second. In my opinion, that clearly leads to a certain amount of physical exertion. Now, to put this in context, billiards, like pool, is considered a cue sport. If we are willing to call that a sport with that level of physical exertion, I don't see why we are not allowing video games the same qualification. Having established that there is a base level of physical exertion and skill, we must now turn to the second of the 3-part definition, the ability to compete. The 2017 international tournament for the game Dota 2 had a total prize pool of $25 million. There is clearly competition here. For the 2018 competitive season, Fortnite had a $100 million prize pool associated with it. Competitive video game tournament team Cloud9 was offered a sponsorship by auto manufacturer BMW for this upcoming season. And the United States already has a practice of granting P1 visas, a visa usually designated for athletes, to competitive gamers, and they have been doing this since the year 2013. We are clearly in a time where competitive video gaming is considered a sport, because we are bringing in people from all around the world for highly valued competitions. Now, finally, and arguably the most important part, sports have to involve some type of an audience. Perhaps the most important part of defining that is the fact that the audience gets to be entertained. Sports rise and fall by their ability to electrify a crowd, and truly inspiring events sell out arenas like Madison Square Gardens. Time magazine outlined an event in 2016. This was not the NBA Finals or a college rivalry, but this is a 2016 video game tournament for the game League of Legends, and the event sold out all 15,000 seats in the arena. The same year, a global tournament for the same game broke 60 million concurrent viewers watching it online. That is more than double the total number of people that watched the NBA Finals Game 7 in 2016, which is the most watched basketball game in history. If these are considered sports, why are we not considering something that draws more viewership? Baseball, on average, only brings in about 1 million viewers per game. It simply dwarfs that. So, in conclusion, there is no reasonable explanation for the exclusion of esports from the community of sporting events. There is measurable data that there is physical exertion, there is a high level of competitiveness around the events, and there is an incredible amount of audience participation. Given these arguments, I move that the resolution to consider competitive video games as a sport be passed, and I yield the remainder of my time to the chair.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I get going today talking about why esports would be a terrible idea to be a sport, I want everybody to give a loud round of applause to Mr. Coleman for being here tonight. He has taken time away from his family to be here. That is very generous of him. He's a gentleman, he's a scholar, he's all those things and more. But he is dead wrong. Esports should not be considered a sport for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I have 4 reasons only. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of extra words because who wants extra words when you can come up here and just say your points right away? Number one, esports is not a physical sport. Sports, do they have to be where you're outside, you're sweating, you might get a concussion, you might have some bad disease for the rest of your life? No. But obviously sports should have to do with something besides raising your heart rates. Guess what? Every time I open my email in the morning and I get an email from Miss Alonzo or Mr. Sharp, my heart rate goes way up. Should that be a sport, me checking my emails in the morning? Absolutely not. Number 2, the 2 most popular video games last year were, and I quote, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Call of Duty Black Ops 4. Both of those games involve shooting other humans. Should we encourage that to become a sport? I do not think so. Let's say if we recognize esports as a sport, then eventually it's going to trickle down to the high schools. Do we want to promote killing other human beings in high school? No. Actually, at this time in our country, I think we should do the exact opposite. But maybe I'm crazy, Mr. Coleman. Number 3, I teach economics, so I know a little something about opportunity cost. Anytime you make a choice in life, you always have to give up something else. Let's say a high school decided to make esports a sport. What are you giving up? Well, I earlier calculated how much money I make as a football coach. I make a couple more dollars per hour than minimum wage, but my assistant coaches do not make minimum wage. If we made sports, or esports, a sport, those coaches would not have the opportunity to get raises because Arizona would have to pay these new esports coaches more money. Therefore, I do not think slave wager is an acceptable way to run high school sports, so I am against esports being a sport, Mr. Coleman. Last but not least, copyrights. Let's say a high school makes esport a sport. Who are they giving money to? EA Sports. They're giving money to these big Sony, Microsoft, all these big companies. Do we really want to support monopolies? No, we do not. Last but not least, number 5, I added a 5th one. Video games do not involve a lot of teamwork. Most of the time, you are one person trying to beat a game. Sure, you could have some teammates in your sports, but most of the time, we all know that is not the case. So, I urge you to vote against esports being a sport. And time lady, how much more time do I have? I have 2:50 left. Okay, I'm going to cede my floor to Mr. Coltman or whoever else wants to speak for this. Thank you.
That was any good at all.
But honestly, up until about 8 hours ago, I thought this question was, should video games be an AIA sport, not just considered a sport in general? So those were most of my arguments. If you think video games should be considered a sport, like, more power to you. Like, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I find fault with the question. I find fault with Mr. Osborne and with this gentleman right here. Because you're just mean, dude. Like, I'm not even kidding. This is just mean. Like, he's mean-hearted. This is JSA. This is Leaders of America. You're just mean.
In the interest of mentioning all of the previous speakers, including the one who was maybe unfairly labeled mean and cold-hearted, it seems like the core of the problem with this question revolves around physical activity. And as one of the previous speakers stated, there is no threshold stated for something to be considered a sport. And if we really want to make one, then that means we are going to have to reconsider a whole lot of other sports in order to avoid hypocrisy. So I think that entire argument needs to be rejected. Now, granted, I am arguing against an economist who didn't know they had 4 or 5 reasons, and that alone should be troubling. However, I really think that what the major argument comes down to gatekeeping. About shooting encouragement, shooting is actually considered a sport. It may not be covered on ESPN when you're watching, but it is considered a sport. And video games do involve a lot of teamwork, just maybe not the ones you are mostly familiar with. However, that could come down to your personal preference. So, as far as the argument for our video game sport or a sport, I consider it to be a really clear cut. Unless we are planning on setting a threshold for physical activity, you gotta let it in, whether somebody wants to meet you on a court or not. So, having said that, I yield the remainder of my time to the chair.